The therapist confronts his client in public, not just to talk to him, but to threaten him. I don't even know where to begin with the boundaries hellhole that is this situation. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for coming back if you've been here before, or hi, welcome if you're new. My name is Mickey. I'm a therapist, and we talk about therapy things on this channel. Today, we're talking about Secret Life of the American Teenager because Aaron and I fell down a rabbit hole. He had never watched the show, and I watched it when I was in college for the memes, and so we started rewatching it, and it's so bad. It's like painfully bad and terrible, and also I think a really surprisingly great example of the way that like Christian values try to leech themselves into media to like covertly indoctrinate children, which is like really troubling and problematic. So we're going to talk about that today. I also want to talk about the therapy scenes in the show, though. That's mostly what I'm going to show you today because they're terrible and it's just wild how bad they are. So we're talking about that. I don't really have any other caveats or intros. Let's just get into the thing. If you haven't watched the show, let me just like give you a brief overview. Ricky is one of the main protagonists in the show. He accidentally got Amy, who is a 16-year-old, 16-year-old young woman, pregnant. And so they are accidentally co-parents. Ricky has also been abused by his parents and is in foster care. So he's in, I'm assuming, court-mandated therapy for this. And so this man that is on the screen right now is his therapist. He is making a phone call to Ricky for missing appointments. So that's the context. Here we go.
Ricky, Ken Fields here. You missed your appointment. In fact, you missed several appointments, and that's really not good.
Okay.
It's not good for you because you need the help. It's not good for me because I need the money. So listen, I hate to threaten people, but if that's what you'll respond to,
Hello?
I'm gonna call your mother. So you get your ass in here, all right?
Why is this man speaking like he's a Law & Order SVU detective? Like, what's going on? First of all, I cannot imagine being this level of angry about a client missing an appointment because the reality is that this happens all the time. People reschedule, people cancel, sometimes people no-call, no-show, especially for people who are in court-mandated services. It's very common for someone to not want to go. So this level of anger is really unwarranted. But besides that fact, taking it out on your client is like beyond unwarranted. Even if somebody was this angry, choosing to channel that into this phone call where you're threatening your client and also making your financial stability their responsibility is wild. This is a wild ass take. Never in a million years is this appropriate. Please, if your therapist ever talks to you like this, run so far away.
Your mother.
I know. Why does he talk like that?
He's a black character written by a white person.
It feels racist also, the way that they're like having him be very aggressive and like the insinuation of violence. It's not just me, right? Am I reading too far into it? It feels like a racist trope and stereotype. Okay, we're going backwards a little bit because I missed it. So we're talking about episode 1. Also, I want to give a trigger warning at this point for discussion of CSA and child abuse and SA generally. Their description of it is like, not particularly graphic because this was aired on TV, but if that's a button for you, please know that going in, there is discussion about it and it is kind of inflammatory. So take care of yourselves.
Sooner or later, I think you're gonna tell me why these sexual conquests make you feel like a man. Because I know you know why you do this, and I know you know it's not gonna help. We go down this road every week, and then we hit a brick wall.
This is so combative.
Having sex with as many women as you can is not gonna make you feel any better. And I think it's making you feel worse.
Aren't I supposed to tell you how I feel?
Yeah. Good question.
I'm coming here enough years to know I'm not that kind of shrink.
What?
Come on. Tell me how you feel.
I feel like my freaking father stole my childhood and then dumped me on another family and said, you take him, I don't want him. He's damaged goods.
It's a valid feeling.
I like the way you started out. Although I'd love to hear a little more anger in your voice because you have a right to be angry. Because your father did steal your childhood by sexually abusing you. But he didn't dump you anywhere. Gigantic hand of social services reached down and plucked you out of a deplorable situation and placed you in a family that doesn't see the damage, they just see the potential. And they love you. And I know you love them, but it's the loving yourself that I'm trying to get you to come around to.
I thought you were trying to get me to come around to not having sex with every girl I meet.
Can you see how these two things are related? Can you see how you're constantly fighting to prove your masculinity all because your father was some sick bastard?
Here's the thing. Like, the logic is not necessarily super flawed, but the execution of this is so off-putting. I want to be clear that in therapy, generally speaking, the client should be speaking more than the therapist does. There are moments definitely where a therapist is going to take time to like explain a concept or to, I don't know, walk a client through something, right? That's very real and does happen. And telling your client how they feel, condescending to your client, telling them, I'm not that kind of shrink, and then continuing to talk over them is so wrong and bad. This is like painful. This is painful.
You have it within your power to not let what he did have anything to do with who you are at this point in your life.
I'm not sure I want to see it. How do you feel about that?
I feel like you don't want to see it. Because you think if you do, you lose your motivation for having sex. And without constant, indiscriminate sex, you'll be a new person, a better person, a person you might actually like, even love.
Okay. There's so much wrong with this. First of all, again, this is why I said I wanted to have a conversation about the way that this very obviously Christian media, for those of you who don't know, we talked about this on the podcast, but this show is produced by a woman whose name is Brenda Hampton. She also produced the show Seventh Heaven in the 90s, which was a very overtly Christian show that peddled a lot of Christian values. And this show seems to be a somewhat modern rekindling of that same intention. So much of this show, we're not going to watch the whole thing because there's like 6 seasons of it and there's a lot of episodes. So much of this show is intentionally, it seems, pushing Christian values, but in a very covert and gross way. There is a moment, for those of you who aren't aware, the show follows the protagonist whose name is Amy. She does end up getting pregnant as a 15-year-old, and so it sort of follows her journey through teen pregnancy and teen parenthood. And there's a moment where Amy is considering abortion, as many folks do, because it's a morally neutral medical decision that lots of people will make because it's the most logical and safest decision, or it should be the most safe decision for them to make depending on their circumstances. And her mother tells her something about how you shouldn't get an abortion. And, you know, it's not even a religious thing for me. It's just that it's so wrong and bad. This sort of, I think, is an attempt to convey that even non-religious people can see that abortion is the most deplorable and disgusting thing that anyone could do. This is what I mean about it sort of covertly peddling these Christian values, is that they use these characters who aren't Christians to also push this narrative that Christian values are just the most logical. They're just the ones that make the most sense. And it's very, very gross, and it's also really predatory. The people who watched this show when it came out were teenagers and very impressionable people who were trying to find their values and beliefs, and having a show like this speak prescriptively about what a child should or should not do in a moment like accidentally getting pregnant as a 15-year-old is just really harmful and ultimately not helpful, because the truth is that getting an abortion is, again, a morally neutral medical decision that is also the right decision for some people. We should be allowing people and encouraging people to make that choice. We've talked ad nauseum on the channel about how parenting and having a child is actually a really sacred and serious obligation to undertake, and people should not be undertaking that out of a sense of duty or punishment. Also, there's a lot of self-punishment rhetoric in this show that's really, really gross. And so this, especially that, like, of course, the damaged, sexually abused boy is having lots of indiscriminate sex because he hates himself. It really seems to paint this picture that if you're having a lot of sex or that you're promiscuous, it's because there's something wrong with you. There's another character in the show that we're not really going to touch, probably just because we don't think we have time, whose name is Adrienne, and she is also like, I mean, she's a pretty empowered young woman who does enjoy sex. That's the verbiage that she uses, is that she has sex and she enjoys sex, and they paint her as this inherently damaged woman who is seeking a sense of legitimacy because she has daddy issues. There's a lot of very obvious and very loud, now as an adult, very loud messaging about how teenagers, especially people who are not married that have sex indiscriminately, are inherently flawed or broken in some way. And so I just think this is a moment that's nice to be clear and, I don't know, like intentional in encouraging you, if you're watching, and especially if you're a parent, to be intentional about looking through the media that children are consuming, because this is really damaging for a lot of people's sense of self-esteem and also for people's sense of self, right? We've talked on the channel a lot about sexual empowerment and bodily autonomy, and I think it's very important to be clear, especially as a clinician, that people who have an empowered sense of sexuality, or that choose to engage in sex with multiple partners or in a polyamorous context, people who have sex outside of marriage, are not inherently damaged or bad. These are not people who are inherently damaged goods or are broken. There are lots of reasons that somebody might choose to have sex with multiple partners or choose to have sex outside of marriage, God forbid, that don't have anything to do with being damaged goods or being broken or being abused also. This also does a disservice to people who are abuse victims, because the truth is that abuse manifests in many ways. There are many, many different types of wounds and intensities of wounds that will show up for folks who have survived abuse like this, and we would be much better served to speak accurately and appropriately about the type of harm that this does, but instead Brenda Hampton decided to use this opportunity to not just shit on victims of abuse by not telling their stories, but also to use this to peddle a very loud Christian message about how sex is inherently bad. And then also to be confused when people have trauma and can't engage in sex after marriage because they've been so effectively traumatized and distanced from themselves and from pleasure and their bodies that they view sex as an inherently scary thing. Like, what a surprise! People struggle with sexual dysfunction after being told for their entire lives that sex is a terrible thing that will send you straight to hell. Like, who could have guessed?
Got some bad news. I love myself constantly and indiscriminately too. And worse news, our time is up and I got a date.
No. You were late. 10 more minutes.
That's literally not how therapy works, by the way. If you're late, you lose that time. At least as far as the way I run sessions. It's not my responsibility to make my other clients wait because you were late. Okay, here we go.
Ah, well, look who's here. Just minutes before my next appointment. You should have called Ricky. I want to talk to you. What's going on?
You can't do this.
I'll come back.
Good. Yeah, you come back. But before you go, what's going on?
To be clear, it's not that we don't care deeply about our clients or respect the difficulty that our clients might be walking through, but especially on an outpatient basis, therapists cannot provide crisis support. This is something that I'm very clear with my clients about. Therapists should be very clear with y'all about it. If they don't provide crisis services, you cannot drop in on a therapist like this. Not just because it's an inappropriate therapeutic relationship that sort of violates the boundaries there, but also because, like, practically there's not time or space for this. You might be showing up during another client's appointment. You might be showing up during their lunch hour or during paperwork time, none of which are appropriate times for this to happen. And it's also egregious that this therapist is like, well, but I'm just going to trick you into talking to me. Like, no, that's not allowed. That is not okay.
I heard this rumor that I got a girl pregnant.
Is there any truth to that rumor?
Maybe.
I'll cancel the next appointment.
Oh my God. Just fuck his next client, I guess. That's not allowed. Also, he doesn't need to make a phone call because that client is likely sitting in the waiting room. Like this, the boundaries in Ricky and his therapist's therapeutic relationship are absolutely non-existent. Okay, let's talk about this.
I'm not nothing. He has no right to talk to me like that. I'm a human being. I'm as good as he is. I could have punched that guy.
But you came here instead to talk it out, so you didn't punch him.
No, but that doesn't mean I won't.
I think it does.
No, it doesn't. The next time he or anyone else tells me I'm trash, I'm gonna punch him.
No, you're not.
Didn't I just say I was? I'm not gonna let anyone talk to me like that ever again.
Because you're not trash. You're a man. You're somebody.
What are you saying? I'm...
First of all, this like argumentative thing that his therapist does is really off-putting, but also bad. This is not, generally speaking, the way that we want to engage with our clients. There can be some situational use for this type of language, but it's really important that we be very discerning with that. And this doesn't come across that way. This comes across in a very condescending and very cavalier way also, which is super invalidating and unhelpful to this client who's also a child, right? Like, I want to continue to ground us in the fact that this is meant to be a portrayal of an adult therapist and a child who is in need of counseling, both because he's been court mandated to because of his childhood abuse, but also because he's survived a lot of things in his life already. And this therapist is continuing to invalidate him. Like, it's very frustrating. And also, like, do you want him to punch people? Because you arguing with him is really not helping in that regard.
Pouring my guts out and you're just mocking me?
See?
I'm not mocking you at all. I'm agreeing with you.
I don't know what you're talking about, okay? Half the time I'm here, I don't know what you're talking about or even who you're talking to.
That's because up until now, you didn't know who you are.
Who am I?
You're a man. As good as Amy's dad, as good as anyone else. You're a human being. No matter how you've been treated before in this life, you are a human being. And human beings make mistakes.
How can I be a man who's as good as everyone else when I made the mistake of getting a girl pregnant?
This is part of the problem here, is that this therapist seems to have no commitment to his therapeutic style. And again, I want to be clear, this is a TV show, right? I sincerely doubt that there was any therapist anywhere near the writing room for this show. It's for children. Fair enough. And also, the way that this therapist engages with his client is so confusing to me, because in 1 minute, he's being very confrontational and very activating, seemingly in an attempt to get his client to say, yes, I am a man. Yes, I am a person. Yeah, I don't deserve to be treated like that. Trying to provoke this anger response in order to get his client to say self-affirmations. But then on the flip side is doing this thing where he's sitting in the change seat. When I was in school to be a therapist, I had a professor who talked about how if you are the person who says all of the things about, yes, you're a person, yes, you're a man, you don't deserve to be treated like that, you're a good person, that sometimes that can be you sitting in the change seat, which means that your client can't sit in it, right? If we conceptualize this almost as musical chairs, where the complacency seat is not really changing and saying things like, no, I'm not worthy, no, I don't deserve things. And the change seat is saying things like, yes, I'm a person. Yes, I'm worthy. Yes, I deserve better than that. If you're the person who's saying all of those things, then it might not create space for your client to be doing those things. And so it can create a barrier to your client being able to make those self-affirmations, right? It's not necessarily that you want to be sitting in the complacency seat unless we're practicing a motivational interviewing type of situation where, you're trying to be confrontational. You're trying to utilize this affect in order to get your client to say these things and then be like, oh, okay, so you do believe these things. But that's only applicable in very specific situations. You want to be really careful with applying that to a session because, first of all, utilizing this in a session between an adult and a child where there's an inherent power imbalance is really risky. You run the risk of being the person who further infantilizes and invalidates your client and distances them from you, but also from therapy, and causes them to create a block, right? There's a barrier here to building therapeutic rapport. So you want to be very careful in your application of things like motivational interviewing and stuff like that. It's applicable in very specific situations and circumstances. That this, I would argue, is not that. But beyond that, this therapist is flip-flopping, where he's using kind of this MI, motivational interviewing affect, but then flipping to be the person who's now sitting in the change seat and is taking up all this space so that his client can't say these self-affirmations. So which is it? I'm confused and annoyed by the way that this therapist seems to have no commitment to the way that he's engaging with his client, which is also creating further confusion. It's just, again, I know it's a show and it's all made up, but it is still bad and wrong.
18-year-old girl is pregnant because of me, and I don't even care about her or the baby. All I care about is that her father called me trash, and I'm not. I'm not trash.
Because?
Because I'm not.
That is as good an answer as any. You're at the doorway to self-respect. Open it, Ricky. Open it and go on in.
This is so cliche.
I don't know how.
I think you do.
Okay, thanks. What a completely useless therapeutic interaction. And again, it's a TV show. It's made up. This is not a real person. But still, first of all, the cliche, what is the word? Oh my God. The cliche representation of angry teenage boy who hates himself, but he can't acknowledge it. And so he's just angry. And the therapist needs to be tough guy in order to get him to respect himself. This is very what misogynists think men learning about self-respect looks like. The reality is that a lot of therapy includes crying, more quiet conversations. Sometimes clients yell for sure. That's definitely not outside the realm of possibility. But I want to be clear that regardless of somebody's gender orientation or presentation, people will engage with therapy in a variety of ways. And this very narrow view of men learn about self-respect by yelling, screaming, and getting angry. Like, that's not really true, nor is it helpful to perpetuate gender stereotypes that harm people. This, again, feels like a very Christian representation of, like, men should be men, and in order for him to heal, he has to get in touch with his masculinity. And who knows? Maybe I'm, like, reading too far into this. Maybe I have just been in the, like, fundy world for far too long and my brain is rotted. That's entirely possible. But I have a sneaking suspicion that Brenda Hampton's very narrow view of the world caused the representation in this show of, like, for example, a young man learning about self-love and self-respect in therapy to be sequestered into this really narrow view about what masculinity and self-respect actually is. And I want to be clear that this is not that, right? This is not that. And people, again, regardless of their gender, will learn about self-love and self-respect in a variety of different ways, some of which might include yelling, but a lot of which include just careful and quiet conversation and self-reflection and maybe crying and some, expression of emotion that just hasn't felt safe to go anywhere else. Therapists are often the people who hold space for you to be the way that you don't feel safe to be with other people or with yourself, even outside of a therapy office. And that's kind of the transformative value of therapy, and like that objective and like sacred relationship is you getting to express the things that you've wanted to express and needed to express but just didn't feel safe or weren't able to express up to this point. Okay, this last thing that we're going to talk about is the moment in which this therapist finds out that Ricky, his client, is in some way involved with his daughter, whose name is Lauren, and also goes to the same high school as Ricky. I want to be clear from the outset that this is a fucking boundaries nightmare, and also why a lot of therapists will practice in places that aren't necessarily super close to where they live or where their family is. A, because it can be uncomfortable to run into clients outside a session because of the confidentiality constraints and things like that. It can cause, obviously, anxiety for clients to run into their therapist. But B, because having your family accidentally interact with your client is horrifying and so scary and just a boundaries fucking nightmare. So this is a terrible situation. Let's just watch it and we'll talk about it.
Just something stupid, and now I don't know what to do.
Well, we all do stupid things from time to time. What did you do, sweetie?
You know Amy, right?
Yes, I know Amy. Please tell me you're not in the same situation before I have a heart attack.
No, I didn't do that, but I did make out with a guy.
Oh, why are you so upset about this makeout session? Oh, by the way, thank you for calling me and trusting me with whatever it is.
I made out with the guy that got Amy pregnant. You know, Ricky. And now I think we got disconnected.
Yeah, let's be clear. This is, again, a boundaries nightmare and also a completely inappropriate reaction to this situation. Also, I love that he's like the, affirmative and kind parent who's like, thank you for trusting me with this. But then as soon as he finds out something that he doesn't like, hangs up on his kid. Great. Super emotionally secure. Also, her friend making out with...
I think I may have lost a best friend.
The boy who got her pregnant is shiesty-ass behavior.
We need to talk.
In front of everybody.
Show up tonight.
Hello?
That guy's Lauren's dad, you know.
No, he isn't.
Yeah, he sure is. Lauren's got...
In front of George, who is the blabbiest of blabby. If you don't know, George is Amy's, the pregnant girl's dad. He tells everybody's business. And the school secretary, the therapist, confronts his client in public, not just to talk to him, but to threaten him. I don't even know where to begin with the boundaries hellhole that is this situation, but also the legal liability. There's no world where a client is ever or a therapist is ever allowed to confront a client publicly or to seek out a client, and at school, especially because he's a minor and you need his parents' permission, his guardian's permission to contact him at all, let alone just like hunt him down at school. This is like, you could get arrested for this kind of behavior. Truly unhinged behavior. Okay, and then let's talk about their little therapy session later, because that's also horrifying. Now we're going to talk about the therapy session that happens later in the day after the therapist has already threatened his client.
I think Lauren's doing it with Ricky.
See?
I feel betrayed. I feel totally betrayed.
Yes.
You're the one person I trusted on this earth.
I don't tell patients who my family is. I didn't know our paths would ever cross, but now that they have, guess what? I'm angry too. Really angry. I thought you acted.
That doesn't matter. You could be so beyond livid with your client and you're not allowed or supposed to say anything about that because it's not about you. And also because you're going to annihilate your therapeutic relationship with this client. Like the rapport out the window, just dead, gone, buried. She has been in the cemetery for 6 months. There's no rapport left between these two people because like truly what the fuck is going on?
Actually making some progress. I thought you were going to be more responsible. I thought you were finally getting some self-respect.
Oh my
But
God.
that was just a lie. A new lie. And even I fell for it. You intended to be responsible.
Oh my God.
And then you discovered that if you just pretend to be responsible, you could continue on your merry way trying to have sex with every girl you get your hands on. And the next one is not, repeat, not going to be my Lauren.
No, Lauren's not gonna be the next one. Grace is. I'm in love with Grace.
I literally don't even know where to start. Like, who says that, first of all? But also, okay, let's talk about like appropriate practice if this were to happen, right? This, first of all, should not happen. But second of all, even if it did, we need to have a conversation between the parties who have protected privacy, right? If you're aware, for example, that your daughter is somehow romantically involved with a client of yours who's a minor, don't say anything. We don't say anything until we're able to interact with the client and let them know, hi, problem. Unfortunately, the person that you were recently romantically involved with is my child. And so like, I don't even like, I would have to call somebody to figure out how to get out of this situation. But also the way that you're handling this is by talking to the person that has the protected confidentiality to let them know, basically. Most people, I would assume at this point would be like, oh my God, that's horrifying. I don't want to be involved with that. And so then we would just separate that and like have a conversation. I don't know, like I would have to contact a supervisor, like an advisor to help me figure out what the fuck you're supposed to do. This honestly at that point might be a call to the board to be like, hi, unfortunately, a bit of an issue. We need to figure this out. And to get some counsel from your licensing board to be like, yeah, how do we unfuck this situation? But the worst case scenario is yelling at your client, invalidating their progress, insinuating that they did this on purpose, and also threatening them and telling them that they're never allowed to interact with your family member again. Like, there's no world where this is the appropriate reaction ever.
You're not in love with anyone. You can't truly be in love with someone else until you find a way to love yourself.
Oh my
And
God.
You can't do that. And I obviously can't help you do that.
Oh my God.
But I can't. Maybe I've been lying to myself too. Maybe I can't help anyone. Because of all the people who have come into this office, you are the one that I've invested the most time in. You are the one that I have made myself available to always.
Hello.
And look at where we are.
Weaponizing your obligation as a therapist to your client by saying the things that I did to you that I'm supposed to fucking do, by the way, mean that you owe me. Also, by the way, now that my brain isn't short-circuiting and I've had time to think about it, the appropriate response to this is to remove yourself and to say, I'm so sorry. Unfortunately, we've had a breach. I can't be your therapist anymore. I will provide you with resources. We could do a warm handoff even, right? Like, there's lots of resources that would be at your disposal to make sure that the transition would be like as minimally detrimental to the client as possible because they didn't do anything wrong because they didn't know, but you would need to remove yourself as a clinician. There's no world where you would have the same rapport. Like, it's all over. Basically, once we've had this breach, it's too late. We've punctured the bubble that is objectivity and like being removed from the client situation. So the way that you would handle this is by telling your client, I'm so sorry. Like, we have had, unfortunately, like a cross of wires that means that I'm no longer capable of being objective. And so I have to hand you off to another therapist who can do that for you. But there's no, even like, again, because the only way to handle this is to speak with the parties who have the protection of confidentiality. So you would need to converse with your client and say, here's the deal. We've had a breach of confidentiality. Unfortunately, this can't continue. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to provide you with referrals or a warm handoff like today, like now. We're done. I cannot communicate with you after this moment ever again because there's no world where I can do that ethically. And we would be really tiptoeing the line of like, what is the word? A conflict of interest or a secondary relationship. There's no world where this is appropriate. And so for your safety, this is how we're handling this, like today. I'm communicating with you about this and we're done, because like there's just no world where like, oh, you need to show up to your session so that I can berate you and invalidate your progress. My God.
Do you want help? So that someday maybe you could be the guy for Grace Bowman.
She accepts me for who I am right now.
Here we go again. It's one step forward and two steps backward.
Oh my God.
Maybe I need a new shrink.
Maybe you do.
The fact that Ricky was the one
But
to
if
say
you're
it.
gonna need Lauren again, you're gonna need new teeth.
Threatening physical violence? That's so far out of pocket. I can't even conceptualize of ever saying something like this to a client. Also, for what it's worth, the whole like you could never love someone until you love yourself thing, wrong. That's not true. That's not real. That is like my least favorite thing that people say. I don't know who posted that shitty quote on Instagram first and circulated this for the rest of us to suffer until the end of time. I hate this fucking quote. This is not judgment at you if you've ever shared it, and I get it. I understand the sentiment that like you need to do the work on yourself and it's good to love yourself so that you can love other people. I understand where it's coming from, and also what this tells a lot of people is that if you're struggling with feeling unworthy, that you're also destined to be alone. That feels really bad. That's also really going to contribute to a lot of hopelessness and a feeling of isolation, which are the two things that therapists screen for when we talk about suicidal ideation. So telling people that you are fundamentally unworthy or incapable of loving other people while you're struggling with self-esteem issues is actually not doing the help that you think it's doing. And on top of that, the truth is that healing happens in community. It's a whole lot easier to love yourself when you feel other people love you and when they tell you repeatedly, yes, even as you are, with whatever difficulties you might have, I love you just the same. It does not matter if you're healed or that you can love yourself or that you're better. I love you for you. I love you for the core parts of yourself, regardless of the work that you have to continue to do on your self-esteem or with depression or with neurodivergence or anxiety or fear or attachment issues or whatever. Regardless of how you show up in the world, doesn't matter. I love you just the same. Like that really does a lot to help a person's self-esteem and to be like, oh, well, actually, maybe that is true. Maybe it is possible that I can love myself. Healing in community is like not only probable, but also incredibly common. That's the way that a lot of us learn to love ourselves. So just to that advice generally. I think we're going to call it there for today because we talked about enough. If you guys want me to talk about more scenes from this show, I'm happy to do that, by the way. There is a whole world of shitty and bad shitty shit in this show that's just like so gross and scary, honestly, that this show happened for like 6 seasons, just unchecked, that Brenda Hampton was like Trojan horsing her Christian values into children's minds for God only knows how long. This was really, really disturbing to go back and watch this and realize actually how biased and intentionally so this show and the messaging is. So let me know what you guys think about that. I'm happy to talk about it if you want, but if you don't, then don't. If you like the video, I don't know why I sounded like a car salesman just then. If you like the video, subscribe to the channel. We talk about stuff like this. We do educational stuff, so you can stay for that. And then share the video to help the channel grow and to help each other grow. And I will see you guys next Saturday. Okay, bye.